Many of the IMGs have been contacting me with some significant and deeply rooted concern about racism in Australia. That is because of the situation that have been previously involved in the UK, US, Canada in particular as well, which I was a bit surprised. And they want to ask me in particular if the racism exists here in Australia and in what shape or form or how severe these issues can be. Now, I am going to address in this video some of my own very personal circumstances. So please bear with me because I'm very honest and open about it. So let's just start. Now, before that, I would like to make a certain context. White doctors are becoming rare as white elephants. The medical profession is not very popular among the local white population, and it's the ethnic minorities like Asians, South Indians and Indians, Pakistanis who would like to go into medicine, even though they might be second generation people here in Australia. Now, the question is, are white doctors still preferred over non-white doctors here in Australia or even in the UK? Now, I vividly remember that when I was a 7-year-old in a junior class in Pakistan, my friends asked if I was Punjabi, Pathan, Sindhi or Balochi. Since none of these languages were spoken at home, I asked my parents and they advised me, we are Urdu speaking. Were my friends ill-intentioned or just curious? Perhaps a bit of both, I don't know. But growing up in Karachi, I saw how language and ethnicity influenced opportunities, especially in government jobs, as most Urdu speakers or native Muhajireens were employed in private sectors purely because they were unable to get government sector jobs. Now, my own first real encounter with toxic racism was actually in the NHS, where, ironically, another migrant doctor, a South African white doctor, who was an orthopedic consultant, made my life and work unbearable. So I left the NHS and moved to Australia. Things were better here until I worked for another consultant called, well, I won't take his name, but he was a respiratory consultant who displayed more racism, particularly towards overseas doctors. This time, I filed a complaint with medical staffing, and I'm proud that I did that. I raised an issue, and eventually that consultant was cautioned on various other similar issues from other IMGs. But thinking about it, it still stresses me out. And in this video, I'll address the key issues faced in different stages of medical career of IMGs when it comes to racism. Now, number one, racism from patients. What about racism while securing training jobs, opportunities equal in surgery, medicine, radiology, dermatology? What about passing exams, which is a big bone of contention? Job interviews from junior all the way up to senior, and racism in handling complaints. Are IMGs or overseas doctors more vulnerable to complaint both from patients, nurses, and even other doctors? Now let's talk about racism from patients. Imagine being a patient yourself for a moment in an emergency department with a heart attack, or maybe your loved one is involved in an accident. What if the doctor who's looking after you or your loved one seems to have a very different, approach? He appears differently, he speaks with a very thick accent, and you're finding it very hard to understand. Would you want to be treated by this doctor, or rather a confident white doctor who can explain things clearly and manage your expectations well in a very stressful situation? I think I'll probably choose a white and very confident doctor, or perhaps even an IMG doctor, provided the communication aspect is handled. Now, racism, I know, exists everywhere, back and home, in the UK, US, Australia and Canada. Now, as IMGs, we are always vulnerable, especially if we fit certain stereotypes, particularly regarding the communication, as I just said. Now, patients are also vulnerable. Some people would prefer to be treated by a white doctor just because they are unable to understand the accent. But is it certain people do it out of pure habit? Let's look at the statistics. According to the Annals of Family Medicine and American Medical Association, around 65% of African Americans and 75% of white patients have no racial preference for their physicians. However, a significant portion, particularly minorities, do prefer doctors of their own race, often due to past discriminatory experiences in their diseases or healthcare issues. In the UK, nearly 41% of the doctors reported racist remarks from patients. Some patients even refuse care from non-white doctors, especially in emergency settings. Now, there was a very comprehensive report being done in 2022 by British Medical Association in which they surveyed over 2,000 of NHS doctors. It highlighted widespread racism faced by ethnic minority doctors, with 70% reporting racist incidents in the last 2 years. The situation is actually worse for overseas qualified doctors, with 84% experiencing racism. Many moved to the UK believing in equality, but ended up feeling more isolated and subjected to abuse and impacting their own well-being. In Australia, the situation is similar, but a little bit different in remote areas. Patients often have no choice. You can visit any rural GP practice and most staff may be from India, Pakistan, or any other ethnic minority backgrounds. In cities, it's a different situation altogether. White doctors are still preferred, especially in hospitals where most consultants in urban settings are white. As you go more regional or rural, you'll find more diverse and ethnic representation. Australia also faces an issue of racism towards Aboriginal people who have been, mistreated and mismanaged. There's a fascinating Four Corners report, which is in a form of documentary, which highlights 16-year-old patients who have died from rheumatic heart disease due to healthcare mismanagement. And that's just not one 16-year-old. Numerous young patients died from rheumatic heart disease, which is a disease more prevalent in a developing world, not in Australia. Most hospitals, as a consequence, now have Aboriginal healthcare workers, and many doctors must complete cultural competency training to be able to address those issues in a more, organized way. What about racism in getting training jobs? Ever wondered why most IMGs in Australia and the UK choose to become family physicians or GP? It's simpler. It's easier to get into training. You work mostly independently, and there is little management interference as you build your own practice. If you look closely, you will find most doctors in niche specialties like neurosurgery, plastic, dermatology in metropolitan areas are predominantly white. Even though entry is based on points, merits, local graduates are still preferred. Now, in Australia, many IMGs from Asia and Africa and Middle East report discrimination when securing training positions. Additionally, Indigenous Australian medical professionals have raised concerns about discriminatory practices in securing training jobs, especially in competitive specialties like surgery. There are two components of most fellowship exams in the UK and in Australia. There's a written component, which is now all computer based, and there's no racism in there. And then there's an OSCE component, which are also called the OSCE struggle. In 2017, migrant doctors complained about discrimination in passing exams with Australian College of Emergency Medicine. This problem mirrors what happens in the UK and the US in a very detailed report. A report on the success rates and examiner bias in postgraduate clinical exams for IMGs in Australia, UK, and the US and Canada revealed, for example, in Canada, IMG success rate in family medicine certification exams were 56% compared to 93.5% for Canadian graduates. Australia and New Zealand, pass rate for specialties like anesthesiology were lower for IMGs. In the US, IMG's pass rate for emergency medicine board certification was 43% compared to 72% for US trained graduates. Ethnic and language biases affect IMG's performance, especially in communication-based tasks like history taking and differential diagnosis. That's what we've been made to believe. In Canada, for example, IMG scored 1.5 to 2 standard deviations lower than the local graduates. Is there a bias? Are all IMGs bad? Go figure. What about racism in job interviews? Now, many qualified IMGs apply for junior and senior positions in Australian hospital, but they often struggle to get hired, even with excellent credential. Now, Australian law mandates that citizen and permanent residents receive preference for job. While this makes sense, it also leaves many talented IMGs without any job opportunities. I have attended 7 or 8 interviews for consultant role before finding my substantive position. I thought that I was improving each time in each interview based on the particular feedback, which were always very wishy-washy. Yet I never got the job. I'm certain if a white consultant would have applied for the same job, they would have get position despite my 8+ years of experience as a consultant even now. I've had my fair share of complaints from patients, nurses, and even doctors. Now, often very trivial matters. I believe my white counterparts would not have faced same level of complaints. Even minor complaints can be incredibly draining and demoralizing, let me tell you that. And some doctors have even been driven to clinical depression or worse by dealing with complaints whilst balancing works and personal life and toxic environment. It's just become too much, and there have been reports that some of the doctors in the US and UK even have committed suicide. Now, what's my conclusion? Now, racism in Western countries does exist, whether it's training, exams, job or interviews or complaints. It is undeniable. It is there. Everybody will have their fair share of racism. Junior doctors often face a brunt of it. While at consultant levels, complaints become less frequent, but they have more impact. And it's just not about the Western countries. Middle Eastern countries have more severe form of racial and even religious discrimination. I doubt very much exists in terms of complaint and accountability in those countries. The lower the grade of the doctor or a passport of a country of origin, the higher the discrimination and punishment. Even in our home countries, many of us experience similar form of discrimination, which led us to leave our countries in the first place, which kind of makes sense. If you want to be racially abused, at least be well paid for it. What can we do? Know your rights. Resist any racial slurs or discrimination. Do not hesitate to file a complaint or escalate the issue. Take professional medical indemnity insurance for well substantiated reasons to guard off those complaints. IMGs need to also support each other. Ultimately, it's up to you to defend yourself and your career. At least in West, complaints are based on merits and they're given their true justification. You are treated fairly, and I can guarantee you, if you are just, it will not jeopardize your career. Look after yourself and each other, and I'll catch you up in the next video. Thank you.